Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation Radio original.
I do thank you for turning out, because I think this could be a pretty important little tete-a-tete we have here. And of course, you know, because you probably responded to that thread I put up about Millennium and tonight. And I'd just like to go over a little bit of that and tell you where I'm coming from, and then see where you're coming from on it. Because we got disparate years and not much talk about what was actually to happen, but more like when. And we have this Rav Rush who says, the 1,000 years begin when the dark age ends. Then he says, watch for the year 2020. I'm not sure what the dark age is, but one of the big theories about Millennium was that it came in with the Byzantine Empire and Orthodoxy. Because primarily during the Byzantine Empire, it was as close as can possibly be, I suppose, with humans in charge of being a millennium, 1,000 years, and it was almost exactly 1,000 years until Satan was let loose, Satan in the form of Muslim hordes coming up to destroy Constantinople and the theocracy that they had built there. I can't remember specifics, but in studying that 1,000 years, it seems like about as close to a theocratic and benevolent society as it could possibly be, with even the emperors being pretty much being confirmed Christians and taking war only as far as it meant to preserve the Eastern Empire. And we have Rav Rush again. He says, he quotes Revelation 20:5. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. Allison and I talked about this earlier on, and this particular part of Revelation 25 is almost universally thought of as an interpolation, because if you read 4 through 6, you'll find that this piece, the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended, breaks in the middle of another thought. And if you take it out, then the thought makes itself clear. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Revelation 5, that's 20:5, sorry. This is the NIV, the nearly, what do they call it? The nearly,
normally inaccurate version.
Oh, okay. I knew it was something like that. It is pretty inaccurate. But then at the beginning of the preface to it, it tells you why. And I saw an angel coming down out of the sky, having the key to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. Now, here's the passage 4. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the suke, the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Yeshua and because of the davar of Elohim. This goes right back to Revelation 1:1 and is, if you could hear it, a description of the two witnesses that are personified later on. They had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Messiah 1,000 years. And here's the interpolation. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. And then it says, this is the first resurrection, blessed and holy, etc., in the first resurrection. So we've got this pericope talking about the first resurrection, and all of a sudden, there's this one sentence that's just popped in there about a second resurrection, that the rest of the dead didn't come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. So even in the
normally inaccurate version.
Oh, I thought it was nearly inerrant version. Okay.
Nearly inspired.
Okay, it's nearly inspired. There it is. The rest of the dead didn't come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. It's in parentheses. And in most translations it is today, although, Allison, didn't you do a text search and find that you couldn't find any ancient witnesses that actually had that out of there?
Yes, and also so did Oh, what's his name? Adam Drissell did the work for me.
All right.
Now, what was that? You couldn't find any ancient witnesses that didn't have it?
Yes.
Okay.
But evidently, the scholars of today think it was an interpolation because it's obviously out of place there.
Yeah, so the Peshitta, the Aramaic version, doesn't have that verse in there.
Seriously?
Yeah, and John Gill, the famous Baptist theologian, he commented on that fact that the Syriac version leaves out Revelation 20, most of verse 5, but the rest of the dead live not until the end of the 1,000 years were finished. But I have a little thing I can screen share here.
Yeah. Oh, this is nice. I see. Can you put that up somewhere?
Sure.
Or make it available to us? Let's see, it's a PDF, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So there's the Aramaic part.
And what's the title of this, or where did this come from?
I sent you those two presentations. This is the third presentation I didn't send over, which is the resurrection and the millennium.
We've got Jeremy, who's going to teach next Wednesday and the Wednesday after on life and death and heaven and hell. And this is in your production.
Yeah.
And so at that time, we can put that up and people will be able to access that, right?
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. Why don't you put in the third one? Are you afraid of Rotten Tomatoes?
No, I don't know. It's we could probably do the third one. I don't know. It's a little bit more subjective, I think, but
that's all right. What else can we be in these kinds of things? All right. So let me go back to the issue here, and we've got Sherry Gamble Freeland, and you know that she's got a reason for saying near 2031, 1,000-year reign starting near 2031. I was hoping she would come on here, but because she's always got logical, scriptural, overstudied reason for about everything. Then Jeremy has Yeshua returns after the millennium to usher in the end of the world with a cleansing by fire. Now, the dark and terrible day of Yahweh. So I kind of consider that the day of Yahweh was in 70 AD. And the cleansing by fire, of course, we find that in, what was that, 2 Peter 3:10? But it's pretty much been grabbed onto by the Adventists, because I think that they think that the earth will be destroyed by fire and that the millennium will be in a different dimension. But you say the millennium is just like today, no different except that over time we will discover the DNA evidence that everyone has Israelite blood, that is the fullness of the Gentiles, free energy, among other technological marvels such as artificial intelligence that will discover cures of all sorts of diseases and cause us to live much longer lives, solve political disputes, etc. It will be semi-utopian after a war with the current powers that is to be, is one, and greater Israel is established with the 12 tribes represented in the land. A prince will be raised up out of the people to rule Israel out of the house of David, and his offspring will continue the line for the rest of the millennium. A race toward the singularity will merge man and machine, making the last son of David effectively immortal, where he will declare himself Elohim in a replay of Revelation. Believers will be heretics in the new technological utopia, refusing to be augmented or jack into the matrix. Our cryptocurrency accounts will be seized, our starships repossessed, our food replicators switched off, all because we refuse to kneel before the machine man. Then we've got a pregnant pause here. Yeshua returns to cleanse the world by fire. Man, I couldn't have said it better. I think that, with some exceptions, I think that that's pretty close to what I believe.
It was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, I mean, I think that kind of covers it.
Well, Jeremy, it seems like so many people that are believers like us think technology is something that is entirely of the devil. But I can't see how we can have the type of 1,000-year reign that we do without the technology that should go with it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's a double-edged sword. You know, it's like money is it's not evil. It's the love of money that excuse me, becomes the root of all evil. And I think the same as with technology, it can help us, but if we use it wrong, it can be detrimental.
Well, some have said that technology, what is done with it only depends on the hands that it's in. And if it's the Father's business to take it out of those hands and put it into another set of hands, then that's his business. And then we've got Rav Rush again. He talks about let's all get Krishna conscious, and he explains that pretty good. I asked him right out, are you proselytizing for Hindu? Please explain. Then he went on with something about Muhammad. So we'll see. Lawrence Alberton, doesn't he live in South Africa? Messiah pitched at the beginning of Pisces. I think he's talking about, when he says pitched, maybe John 1:18, where it says that he pitched and skinned among us. And age is 2,160 years, but the years will be shortened. Then the Millennial Kingdom, that will be marked by Torahlessness, the approximately 2 billion Christians being burnt up by the other non-Israelites upon his return. But we will inherit the earth and live in peace for 1,000 minus 7 years. So he's still somehow applying that 7 years, which might be 10 years, 10 and a half years in Revelation, to something that's happening in the future. But he agrees the earth will be burnt up after Judgment Day. Then we have Laverne Gooding. I'm working on editing a book for him right now. The book is called Jesus Was in a Scene and Your Bible Isn't Enough. It's a good book. I think a lot of people should read it. And right now we're going around and around a little bit on the doctrines of preterism. But he says the 1,000 years of peace, which is the Sabbath according to the 8,000-year timeline prophesied by Enoch, whereby 1,000 years equals 1 day, begins after the second coming, which follows the defeat of the Antichrist and false prophet, which follows the death of the two witnesses. When Scripture says 1,000 years of peace, it means just that, not 1,100 years, not 2,000 years or some other number. And we are very near to the end of the sixth day. Unfortunately, the Great Tribulation must happen before we enter day 7 and the 1,000 years of peace. Now, of course, like I said, we go round and round about preterism in his book. So he is a non-preterist. That is to say, he's not thinking that Revelation has in any way been fulfilled in the first century, as some of us think, all or most of it anyway. So he's applying 7 years of the Revelation onto the 1,000 years again. And then we have Sean Case, who makes a definitive statement. I believe in the Millennial Kingdom. That was it. Scott Paddock, one of the greatest experts on Temple Judaism I've ever known, he says a shavua in the chuppah for a wedding and a king's coronation, and then 993 more years on the earth. I kind of think it happens sometime in the interim. Then we have somebody saying, how familiar with the Zohar are you? Not so familiar. Second Temple Scripture is not able to be dissected into individual verses and cherry-picked for sermon. I agree. The Zohar is only able to be interpreted as a whole. Well, for me, if that's the case, then it has to be rejected. But if we can go through it like we do everything else and spit out the bones, maybe there's something there. And then he goes on to say, this being Rav Rush again, and this is kind of interesting. Finally, in the year 1666, a sultan decided a Shabbatai. He was, Zebdi Shabbatai was a man that proclaimed himself to be Messiah in the 17th century, and he had a huge following. So that's the background for what he's talking about, Zebdi Shabbatai. The sultan decided he must be stopped. He was captured and brought in chains to Constantinople, again, the Byzantine Empire. There he was given the ultimatum, die or convert to Islam. Of course, he chose the obvious. He converted, died 10 years later, a broken man. Why broken? Because Sufis, which he was one of, understand health. The Zohar is about peace, love, redemption, and salvation, records that were protected during the Dark Ages kept for us today. And then he says, refer to the book of Galatians. Well, I think what's interesting is that he brings up Shabbatai. That's quite a story, because even after Shabbatai changed to Islam, he still had lots and lots of followers, and still today there are some, though that was like 400 years ago. Then I again ask him, let me ask you plain out, are you a proselytizer for Krishna or Islam? Are you a student like the rest of us, or do you already know all the answers? I'm asking seriously. If you are and do, then might as well just come forth with it. Let's see if he does. And here's the longest answer to consider. Sylvia Snyder, no relation to me, but a good friend. She cites Ezekiel 40 through 48. She says, the Millennium Kingdom is in this earth. Now, that passage is the one that primarily speaks of the Zadokite priesthood. Talks about how the Zadokites will be in the priesthood from then and forever, that the Zadokites will set the calendar, will set the worship. And this is one of the things in the Yahad we're trying to establish, because especially Ezekiel 40 through 44 is just chock full of neo-Torah type of things that would apply very well to a millennial type kingdom. Sylvia goes on to say, Yahshua will rule and reign for 1,000 years. Notice that. She says Yahshua. When we met her, she was talking about Jesus, but now she changed a little bit. In Revelation 5, the true believers will be priests and kings in his kingdom, Zadokites, by the way, the ones who survived the tribulation, and the remnant Jews who were kept safe during the tribulation will be serving in his kingdom. All will have to give homage during the Feast of Tabernacles every year. I think that's Zechariah 14. There will be mortals and immortals living on the earth. Yes, I agree. Satan is bound for 1,000 years without any testing like we had. Yes. After the 1,000 years, Satan is loosed and again deceive the nations. That's way down the line. Same players as the last time, Gog and Magog. At that time, Yahshua will separate the sheep from the goats, and all will be taken up to heaven. Remember, Yahshua talks about the sheep and the goats being nations, not individuals. The believers will be in the city of God, and the non-believers will be at the white throne judgment seat. Satan and his Antichrist will be cast into the lake of fire, Tartarus, which is the lowest of the lowest. The others will be judged according to their bad works, which will be in placement, that is, in some degree of hell for them. At that time, Yahweh will renovate the earth with fire and have a renewed earth. The holy city will come down from heaven, and Yahshua will be the light of it, will have a mansion in glory. New Jerusalem, I am sorry, there is so much more, unable to say everything. That's about, in a nutshell, sort of, to speak. That's very much like the Pentecostal idea. Seems like if we could meld these together in some way. We have one more, I think. We are in the tribulation right now. Revelation 20 requires that Satan be bound for 1,000 years. Sorry, talking about me, but you are off the track, my friend. Well, what I had made as a comment was to check out the priesthood and calendar in Ezekiel 40. I think that's on the right track. Let's see, is there anything else here? No, that's about it. Okay, let me tell you my perspective briefly, and then I'll let you have it. Not to go into any detail, but concerning the time factor, the first thing I find is in Enoch, where at the very beginning, the Lord of Spirits, or Yahweh Elohim, as I translate it, talk about a covenant with all creation, to restore creation at some time in response to creation crying out on account of the giants taking everything over to the point of eating and copulating with everything on the earth and then eating each other. Remember Numbers, when the spies went in, they say, this is a land that eats itself. And creation cries out, this covenant is made between Yahweh Elohim and all of creation that he will restore. Then there are other parts of Enoch that talk about that restoration, especially the parables and the Son of Man part. And I find that echoed in Romans 8, where Paul talks about all creation is groaning, and they're awaiting the revelation of the children or sons of Elohim, and for the redemption of creation. I'm thinking that Paul's talking right straight about that same covenant. Then, to make the story short, I probably would go to Barnabas' epistle, and I can see that he specifically talks about the 6,000 years of salvation history, with the seventh millennium being that of a time of restoration, and the eighth day, it becoming a new world. Now, we have in the scriptures, both the Bible and extra biblical scriptures, a 7-day or 7,000-year scheme, plan of salvation history. We don't know what happened before that from their point. That's why people are always saying that, we got a 6,000 or 6-day creation, because just simply the Bible doesn't speak about what happens before that. And on the 8th day, this is the end of a millennium, all we know is the King, the Messiah, turns a perfected world over to the Father. We don't know what happens after that. But at any rate, he specifically talks about what is in the book before Barnabas, and that is the Revelation. In the first canon, Barnabas was right after the Revelation, where it talks about Kilioi, or 1,000 years. The devil will be bound for 1,000 years, and there will be a new reign and new world coming to pass. And that Kilioi, when I read that, I know that any Greek person familiar with Greek would know that Kilioi is plural, but it's been translated as just 1,000. There's a lot of extra biblical books that talk about this. Another one is the book of the Gospel of Bartholomew, of all places, where Bartholomew is fighting with the devil in hell for 7 days, and the devil in hell is personified as a huge slug, a slug. And Messiah says to Bartholomew, go put your head on the slug. Go put your head on the devil in hell. Quite an entertaining book. Nevertheless, it does talk about that 6,000 and the 7th millennium. And I'm counting with the accepted biblical chronologers who say, if they take Bible chronology back, it goes back to somewhere around 4,000 BC at their word, since Messiah comes somewhere around 0, if we had a 0 date. We don't. There's no 0 in there. And so just simply counting them up brings us to 1994, 95. And so I'm just figuring if anybody's going to know, it's got to be somewhere around 95 and on. And I'm one of the radicals that believe that it's in process now, but that this millennium, as described, is not going to be like Jesus is going to come at the beginning. This is a long and drawn-out process of 1,000 years where, first of all, as Enoch also says, the movement starts again. The Zadokite priesthood starts again when the books are open, when the books come out of the ground. It starts all over again. Only this is the beginning of the righteous time when people eventually come back to life and or are judged and then live on a restored earth. And that earth may be that fire, literal fire, cleanses it. I don't know. I'd rather think that, as Paul says, or somebody says, world without end, that it doesn't end, but that it's cleansed through a symbolic fire, and that is through the revolution of the people of Elohim.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
People eventually come back to life and or are judged and then live on a restored earth. And that earth may be that fire, literal fire, cleanses it. I don't know. I'd rather think that, as Paul says, or somebody says, world without end, that it doesn't end, but that it's cleansed through a symbolic fire, and that is through the revolution of the people of Elohim on the earth at that time, and the restoration of those who are coming forth from wherever they have, from their death, and also the fact that the devil will be bound up for 1,000 years. And that's all the farther I want to go with it, because I want to hear your ideas, if you have any, on this. Yes, I've gone a lot farther with the check from the government and so forth, but I want to hear what you have to say, especially since, Jeremy, you put some effort into this. See who else is here that might have been on there as well. Oh, good. Rachel's here. I won't mention Barnabas anymore. What do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I kind of subscribe to the idea of 7,000 years of this world, and then the eighth day is the world to come. So I agree there. And in terms of just the count, I think if you add up using the Josephus and you use the Septuagint, and I think also the Samaritan Pentateuch, with regard to the dates of some of the patriarchs from Shem to Abraham, they leave off, 100 years off of all of those guys.
Oh, yeah.
And if you recalculate everything, adding that missing 650 years, that puts us at about 6,650 ish. So that would put us, right smack in the middle of the millennium. And so I kind of, adopting that idea and looking at, here, I think it's going to be something that's more, a gradual thing, just as everything else in history is just kind of gradual.
Yeah.
That we're working towards a utopia. It's hard to believe that the devil is bound at this point in our history. But at the same time, I kind of feel like maybe that's our excuse.
But look, the devil has to be exposed before he's bound, like a cancer. If you're going after that, I use this illustration a lot. You got to cut down there in order to get to it first. And I kind of feel like, especially in the church, man, the devil's being exposed like crazy. But what's the world going to do with it? Mm-hmm. Not much. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of it. I mean, I like to throw in, all the sci-fi stuff too. And just because, if I try to think about, where we are today versus 100 years ago or 150 years ago, the majority of human existence has had a horse and carriage. And now we have cars and we have airplanes. And so we have even self-driving cars now. So, what does it look like in 100 years from now? And, what if it is the beginning of the 6,000 years or the 1,000 year reign instead of being 6,650? If that's the case, then and there's 1,000 years left, what is it going to look like in 500 years? I mean, things are going to look incredibly different. So I imagine that the way that we kind of fulfill some of these, what look like kind of millennial prophecies about living longer and, I think that's real technological medical advances. We find out those things, and I think one key element. I don't think Yeshua is here during that period. If obviously, if we're in it, I don't see him reigning physically here. But if it's yet to come, if it's we're a few years out or whatever. My expectation is that is something that he reigns with us for 1,000 years, as he is with us when two or more are gathered in his name. Mm-hmm. He's as physically there as he's going to be in the millennium. So then I think we've got other prophecies that need to be fulfilled, including the greater Israel and the fullness of the Gentiles and things like that. So I'm trying to wrap that all together into one thought and go, okay, well, if the current Israel isn't it, which I don't believe that it is, that's going to have to go away. That means there's going to be some war because the powers that be are still cranking away with the current system, and I think that's got to fall at some point, and that makes room for a greater Israel with greater borders. And I think when we start getting into genetics and DNA and stuff like that, I've read two different geneticists who, one of them said, just based on the math, that everybody today that's alive has got some amount of Abraham's DNA in them at this point, just because of the proliferation of DNA over time and all the breeding. And then another one said he believed that everybody had Levite blood at this point. He went even further to say even we all have Levite blood, which is pretty interesting in terms of, taking some of those verses a little bit more literally in terms of, being priests in a priestly kingdom, priests and kings, as some people say, I guess. So that's pretty interesting. And I just kind of like to think about that and throw that in there to think about. But I think that's pretty much the main gist of it. I think you have to go through all the verses where people, think it's Yeshua. That's the prince that's ruling over this new found kingdom of Israel, United Kingdom of Israel, if you will. But I do think it would be a really interesting twist if you had pretty soon artificial intelligence is going to be able to quickly map all of our genome and connect us all. And we're going to know exactly where we came from and who we're from and all the family trees that are on ancestry.com and all that. The AI is going to go through and it's going to figure all that out. And it's going to connect the right ones to the right ones. And connect that with our DNA. If you've submitted your DNA to ancestry.com, it'll go through all that and figure out who you are. So we'll know that a true son of David is being raised up as this prince. Notice he's not called a king. And I think the word is nasi. So it's, a raised up one, maybe even like from the people, like a prime minister or president or something, not necessarily a king, and definitely not a prince. But anyway, let's just roll with it and say it's a son of David who, his son and his son and his son and so on go on to rule this kingdom as they should. And interesting twist would be that son of David ends up being the Antichrist manifest and says, hey, I am Elohim. He's the guy that stands in the temple. and it would be a real weird twist. That would really, I think, fool a lot of people if you had somebody who could claim that he's, got priestly blood and he's got Davidic blood and he's, he meets all of the criteria as being a son of David, et cetera. And he's basically immortal due to technological advances that, put his mind into a machine or something, it just would be an interesting twist.
Not only that, but what you've just said is a laundry list that I'm going to have to go back and listen to and write the different aspects down, the things that need to come together. You said the greater Israel. I sure agree with that, but look what's happening there. I mean, the tactic that Yahweh always uses is they're killing each other. Yeah. And they're so reprobate that they're really of no use other than brute beasts, it seems like to me, even the children, unfortunately. Yeah. Could you imagine that they would be so depleted that they would they would ask Israel to come to their aid? And it's like in that one passage in Isaiah about everybody will go looking for a Jew to find out what's going on. Can't remember the passage, but perhaps they would come begging someday. It looks like Syria, is pretty much on the rocks, and I don't know.
Jack?
I think that you got a lot there too. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Isaiah 17 and the Oracle of Damascus, and that's a big deal. And also, it seems to be really, really, really quiet in Lebanon town. Yeah. Whatever's going on over there, is real quiet. I know that there are many ways that the kingdom can happen, or the greater Israel, but I think that it's a gradualist thing. At least seeing that, or maybe historical, even though I can't say I'm a historicist per se per the Book of Revelation, but that these things like the Oracle of Damascus is happening slowly. If you apply it to the whole country, that's what's going on. It's being, just flattened. By Americans, by Russians, by the Islamic forces that are over there, by their own military. And what will happen? We don't know what will happen when whatever happens. Damascus is gone. That whole nation is wiped clean, I guess. What happens? What kind of vacuums does that create with Iran, with Lebanon, since it's Lebanon was part of the ancient Israel as well. We've got the Abraham Highway and all that good stuff that's in Isaiah 19. And as a partial preterist, do you see that being fulfilled, or that it has been fulfilled, or that is going to be fulfilled? The highway in Isaiah that's talking about linking Israel, Syria, and Egypt.
You're talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I see it being fulfilled right now before our eyes in the last 10 years. Definitely. What else could it be when a university garners millions of dollars to do road work on the same path as Abraham went, and then we get this story in Isaiah 19 about a roadway going from Syria to Israel to Egypt, and then calling the three together? The mission of both the Bible and Harvard University is exactly the same thing. If you don't know what we're talking about, go to abrahampath.org. One thing they don't do on abrahampath.org is connect this with Isaiah 19, because I don't think they have a clue about that. Yes, abrahampath.org. Take a look at it and consider Isaiah 19. And this is a kind of a prophetic doctrine that's just not made the rounds yet. Allison, you have a hand up?
Yes, sir. This is a little bit weird and conspiracy theorist sort of thing, but what if, since I'm about 3/4 of the way into the preterist understanding, not completely convinced, but pretty much there, what if this has all been pretty much accomplished except for the very last bit? But what if someone else Hasatan is manipulating us, the whole world, into thinking it's coming again and trying to profit from that and leading us down this path that we've been taught forever. For at least 200 years. And I think at that point, when he is poised to take control, then Yahweh will go, nope, and send his son. Just came up with that about 5 minutes ago, listening to this discussion. What do you think?
Well, you have this fellow named C.I. Schofield and his Schofield Bible. When I got into the Emory Seminary, the guy that paid my way, the first thing he did is send me a Schofield Bible, and he said, use this at all times, which when I looked at it, I could not do, because the Schofield was a fundraiser, at the end of the 19th century, and he included in his commentaries the doctrines provided by John Darby, who got his from the Jesuit Lacunza, about rapture and all these different things. And then the Schofield Bible is the most popular edition of the Bible that ever was. And it's full of those kind of notes that now I understand as a complete deception. But people have been so soaked in that, especially with popular Christianity on television and in churches, that if you even consider or talk about things in Bible prophecy that have already happened, you lose the ear of the people that have been so indoctrinated. And that's an absolute fact. How I say, maybe I have been sent all kinds of crap through social media, because I feel that most positively that 2/3 or more of Revelation is done, and the rest is done in a different dimension. So yes, they get on you, and I kind of like Sylvia's comments there. It's absolutely ingrained in you all the time. And I just wrote an answer to a quorum question, which is the greatest cult, most dangerous cult in the whole world, which I had to say was the Roman Catholic Church. As much as I liked a lot of their doctrine, that's the most dangerous cult in the world. And what I didn't mention the doctrines that they put out regarding the eschaton, but still, this all came from the Catholic Church, was picked up by the Protestant Church, and here we have it. We're to the point, you and I and everybody here, we have heard so much in our lifetimes about the end times, and for me, scared out of my wits as a teenager about the whole thing, that it's hard to break away from. You almost feel like you're turning your back on God. Am I the only one that feels that way? I don't think so.
No, I definitely felt that way growing up, and I've heard probably every different version of end times eschatology talk that I can take anymore, I think.
What'd you come out of, Jeremy?
When I was in my parents' home, we were Christian Missionary Alliance.
Oh, okay.
And when I went on my own, I ended up in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and that's where I got saved and where I got baptized, if you can imagine.
Not now. How long has that been, I wonder?
I was 26. I'm 39 now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So if you don't mind me asking, what is it that turned you? What is it that made you finally walk out the door, or have you?
No, yeah. I certainly did. What it came down to is I was listening to a radio program called Way of the Master, where they use the Ten Commandments to share the gospel, and their radio program essentially says something like, do you think you're a good person? And most people answer yes, and they say, well, have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever told a lie? And your obvious answers of, yeah, of course, I've told a little lie here and there. And they say, well, what do you call that? You call that a liar. You call that a thief. So you end up confessing, in a way, your sins according to the law, and then they kind of throw it at you like, if you were judged according to the law, would you go to heaven or hell? And so one of their programs, anyway, had a list of 25 signs that you're a backslidden Christian in need of repentance. And I thought, I had this whole gospel thing down. I had their whole program down in terms of sharing the law and the gospel. And long story short, I realized that I couldn't recognize my own sin. And so I was praying to the Father, and I was saying, Father, I was just scared out of my mind. I said, Father, you got to reveal my sin to me. You got to reveal my sin. And I prayed I was on the floor, face to the carpet, and just praying and crying and saying, oh, Father, I can't even hear my conscience speaking to me. And so I ended up going to bed praying, and I dreamt about praying that same prayer. And when I woke up, I heard that, whether it's the still small voice or it was my conscience, or I'm not sure, it told me my sin. It told me my sins. And I started with the regular, no, I've got an excuse for that sin. And I said, oh, wait, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to quelch this voice that's telling me what my sins. I need to listen, and I need to accept that that's what it is and do something about it. And so I did something about it. And, that was my turning. That was my repentance. And then I started looking at, I was really into politics, and I started to realize I just couldn't see truth from fiction in politics. I couldn't understand what was real and what wasn't. And the same was happening in the scriptures, with church and all this stuff. I couldn't discern one theologian's defense of one doctrine versus another. And I said, Father, I'm going to plead with you again. If you can just be the teacher and guide me to truth, I'll believe it. But I don't want to waste any time with any of the falsehoods. Just keep me on track. And as silly as that sounds, in some regard, it's almost superstitious to some, immediately that was answered. I just basically said, I will trust you no matter where you lead me, no matter how crazy it is. And the first door that opened was the Sabbath. And I walked through that door, and I just did it, and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know that, I basically was hungry and cold and lonely because I didn't turn on my lights. I didn't cook anything, and I forgot to prepare. And I couldn't drive anywhere to see my friends because I was doing it the way the Jews do. And but I walked through that door in faith, not knowing how to do it, and he rewarded that. and opened up clean eating, and then the festivals, and then all of Torah, and then a revelation of what things were false out of the religion that has become Torah observance. And I got the calendar. I mean, he just keeps throwing me things, and I just keep walking through those doors, and whatever it is, I could read the book of Enoch, and it's like I'm almost able to just say that's an interpolation, that's Hellenism, that's Catholicism. I'm just naming these. I don't have the scholarly background to be able to say those things. So it's all him. And so now I go back and I research what that intuition was, and I come to find out that these things are true, and I make presentations to try to document all that stuff. But but that's the long story short long.
Honestly, that's a pretty typical story, but
yeah.
At the same time, it is also what would you call it? An explosive story in a person's life. Me too. The Sabbath thing, man, I had nightmares, and Adventist preacher was after me to kill me and all these other things. And when I gave in, all of a sudden, everything was all right. Who else has a little something about Millennium or their conversion? Check your chat, Jason or Jeremy. Check your chat. You had some comments on there. Jason, you got one? Allison, you got one?
This is really stupid, but this is how it happened for me.
I doubt it.
I was a Bible student, a Russellite. You know what that means, Jackson, but I don't know if anybody else does.
Probably not.
Probably not. It'd take too long to explain, but they're favorable about Israel, but I think they think they're a sort of replacement theology, somewhat. But I had been raised in the faith, been away from it forever, couldn't take all the pressure when I was a kid. We had too many issues here. But I kept hearing in my head, you're not alone, you're not alone. You need to search and find where you came from. So I did. I went back to Bible students, and I studied with them for a while, and I got baptized, because that's how we do. You don't do it until you're ready, until you understand what you're doing, because it's a commitment. It's basically sort of a pseudo marriage. So we did that. I did that and studied with them a little longer, and I was on my way to study on a Sunday, and I heard this voice that said, "Hey, the Elohim that you are worshiping is the Elohim of Israel. Why don't you look into that?" And I was like, "Oh, really? Yeah." So I started studying the history of it and trying to figure out, no, it's not some Christian Yahweh. It's from Israel, because I was totally not that way. And I have delved in so deeply, and I've found so much that just makes so much sense and connects me. And the first thing I did was do Shabbat, like you said, and I didn't know how to do it either. And and I was hungry and cold and didn't know how to do anything, because it was like, oh yeah. But it was just like I just heard this voice that said, "Hey, where did the Christian God come from? Go study that." So I did, and I'm still working on it. So thank you.
How long you been in here now? 4
Me?
years? Yeah.
3 here. Yeah. Went somewhere, was in something else for about a year. It's great.
We're glad to have you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Glad somebody else understands.
Now is the time, my friends, for you to make plans for Sukkot. Why don't you consider coming to be with the Yahad this year? October 2nd through 9th, we will be gathering at Booker T. Washington State Park in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is on the Zadokite Essene calendar. Check out the information at theyahad.net/Sukkot. We have a great and meaningful time every year, and it's so good to see Facebook friends in person. That's where we began, on Facebook, and now we're no longer just heads, but we meet and see each other as we are, and in holy convocations, and in fun, and most of all, in wonderful koinonia fellowship. That's the Vero Yahad Sukkot, October 2nd through 9th, 2018, at Booker T. Washington State Park in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Check it out at www.theyahad.net/Sukkot. I hope to see you there.
I'm afraid our time's up today, my friends, with the Jackson Snyder Presents, but we'll follow this on in the next show because I know we're all desperate to hear about sedition, bloody murder, retribution, and other acts of saving grace.
My friends and I have everything we need, and where I am is good enough for me.